The Dakota Access Pipeline protests began in April of 2016. The pipeline was meant to carry crude oil through 4 states, North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, and Illinois, under a Missouri River reservoir called Lake Oahe. It was set to go mainly through private land, however much of this bordered tribal lands or was land still contested as belonging to the native tribes, including the Sioux. The pipeline, referred to as the Black Snake by native people, would put the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation in North Dakota at risk if it ever ruptured, or even if it leaked, it could contaminate the area's drinking water in Lake Oahe. The Sioux tribe began protests attesting that the path of the pipeline would further damage sacred sites near the lake, violating tribal treaty rights. Members of the Sioux tribe and their supporters, calling themselves protectors, claimed local tribes were not properly consulted about the pipeline route and the possible negative impacts on tribal land were not fully considered before approvals were made. Between December of 2015 and January of 2016, drafts of the plan were published and open for public comment, but the Dakota tribes were not directly consulted. By April of 2016, the Army Corps of Engineers approved the Dakota Access Pipeline route, determining that no historic properties would be subject to effect by the crossing under Lake Oahe, and noted that the Standing Rock Sioux requested further archaeological survey of that area. By June and July of 2016, the U.S. government's Advisory Council on Historic Preservation had written a letter to dispute the determination, citing a need for proper cooperation with tribal leaders to identify areas of concern. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers had already approved the portion of Dakota Access Pipeline route that crossed the Missouri River at the Lake Oahe Reservoir. The crossing was said to be on Army Corps-controlled land. However, the land still contained a burial site that belonged to the Sioux. In August 4th of 2016, the Standing Rock Sioux tribe sued the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The tribe alleged that the Corps had failed to adequately consult tribe members before approving the pipeline, and had violated the National Historic Preservation Act when it, quote, effectively authorized construction of the vast majority of the pipeline in and around federally regulated waters without any provision to ensure against destruction to culturally important sites. They also said that there is a high risk that culturally and historically significant sites would be damaged or destroyed in the absence of an injunction. Additionally, more than 90 scientists signed a resolution in support of halting all construction of the DAPL until revised environmental and cultural assessments were carried out, as requested by the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. By September of 2016, a letter from the Army Corps of Engineers did halt construction, and it sought to remedy the situation, asking to consult the affected tribes more thoroughly and in the future preserve tribal land and rights. The letter supported protesters but requested they remain nonviolent. It did not mention violence on behalf of the U.S. government and private security firms against protesters up until that point. In September, a private security group who had been using dogs to intimidate protesters now had more members available and began to send these dogs to attack. They also began macing protesters and injured several people, including a child. Over the course of the next several months, protesters would continue nonviolent action, and military police, along with increasing numbers of private security, would begin retaliating more and more violently. Police are reported to have hosed down and maced protesters in freezing temperatures who gathered in the water near a sacred burial ground. Additionally, they used rubber bullets but had snipers nearby along with dogs and full riot gear, all of which was incredibly violent considering the protesters remained very nonviolent. The following video displays some of that violence against peaceful protesters.
You're seeing the police, whether it's state police, DAPL security, they're on top of a giant mountain that is where their ancestors are buried, the Native Americans.
The natives want to go and hold a peaceful prayer circle on the other bank. This is land that is theirs per the Laramie Treaty of 1851. This is a sacred burial site, but also they're saying it's Army Corps of Engineer lands, which means on multiple levels what's happening here is illegal. This is a militarized police force up against an unarmed, peaceful prayer for people.
So I was out there, one of the first ones in the water, maced us. It hurts. It hurts.
I feel like I'm watching the salt mine protest with Gandhi. I mean, these people are in the water. They're freezing to death. This water is not warm. I couldn't feel my legs. I had to get out or I was about to pass out.
Save our water!
They're trying to disperse women and children because there's a fear that the cops that are coming in on those boats over there have actual bullets.
The police are committing genocide!
I see a sniper laying right there on the ridge. You can see his rifle sticking over the edge of the ridge right there. The sniper is not holding rubber bullets, I guarantee you.
These people from the North Dakota Police Force and the United States government has lost legitimacy in every respect today.
President Obama needs to step in and intervene before we have loss of life on either side.
You guys ever see anything like this?
This is absolutely insane, man. These people are just trying to protect their families, protect their water.
It's like a row of dominoes. You got one maced over here, one maced over here, one maced over here. Did they give you warning that they were going to mace you?
Oh, not at all. Sitting there with my hands up, and I told him I love you, and the guy came and sprayed us. They sprayed me in the face for probably 6-7 seconds, and I just stood there until they were done.
Once you feel the power of these people, I mean, it brings tears to your eyes. People, they're fighting for a human right.
Protesters camped at construction sites throughout the year through freezing temperatures. They remained largely nonviolent, although some did resort to things like burning pipeline crew trucks, burning campsites, and throwing wood and debris into construction and camp areas. Tribal groups maintained peaceful tactics such as prayer circles, singing, and camping in the construction path, facing violent retaliation from police. Overall, the nonviolent methods won support from across the United States and around the world as people came in to join the protests and offer criticism on the pipeline's approval. Celebrities and citizens offered solidarity and began to call out the greed of big companies overpowering the right of tribal people. Sister protests happened in many cities, and the conversation began about protecting tribal rights and the environment, pointing out that these protesters were risking their lives because the issue was one of great importance. Theorists such as Fannin might say violent revolt was imminent from the oppressed tribal people, and some protesters did resort to violence, but overall they succeeded in following a nonviolent path, much like the nonviolent icon Gandhi, promoting love and peace despite violent retaliation. The DAPL protests at the least work to open dialogue about how Native people and their stolen land are treated in the U.S., and they also managed to halt the pipeline's progress while drawing attention to the violence and greed from the oil industry and the U.S. government's dismissal of tribe concerns along with health concerns for locals. Their nonviolent tactics promoted change and consideration, whereas concerns may not have been taken to heart if the protesters appeared to be violent hoodlums. I believe, much like the case of apartheid, the DAPL protesters were against a strong militant force that they had little to no chance of meeting head-on, so nonviolent tactics were necessary as well as beneficial. Also similar to apartheid, putting outside pressure on economic and political figures allowed for a conversation that gained support from around the world. These protests would not have created the kind of movement they did with violence, because violence would have been dismissed and protesters labeled as aggressive, law-breaking natives. Nonviolence here was used much how a figure like Martin Luther King Jr. and the civil rights activists of the 1970s used it, in order to display the unfair treatment and the violent retaliation against an oppressed group. It also served to highlight the lack of support from the U.S. government. Despite the pipeline being approved again in 2017, I see the Standing Rock protests as largely successful because they managed to open dialogue about Native rights and the importance of environmental protection. The nonviolent methods used made it clear that the United States continues to use force to keep minority groups oppressed, and that sometimes it takes courage and strength to stand against great odds. I also see that creating a movement is a powerful step to fighting the powers of capitalism and corruption in any society.